The New Zealand Defence Force consists of three services: the Royal New Zealand Navy, the New Zealand Army and the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and is commanded and headed by the Chief of Defence Force. New Zealand's armed forces have three defence policy objectives. New Zealand regards its own national defence needs as modest, due to its geographical isolation and friendly relationships with neighbours. As of September 2017, the NZDF had 302 personnel deployed overseas on operations and on UN missions in the South Pacific, Asia, Africa, Antarctica and the Middle East areas. As at 2021, the Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief, Dame Patsy Reddy, exercises power on the advice of the Minister of Defence, Peeni Henare. Under the Defence Act 1990, Air Marshal Kevin Short was appointed Chief of Defence Force on 1 July 2018. The NZDF has announced that Air Vice Marshal Tony Davies will serve as the next Vice Chief of Defence Force. After the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840, New Zealand's security was dependent on British Imperial troops deployed from Australia and other parts of the Empire. By 1841, the settlers, particularly those in the New Zealand Company settlement of Wellington, were calling for local militia to be formed. In 1843, a local militia had been formed in Wellington without official sanction. This prompted the Chief Police Magistrate Major Matthew Richmond to order its immediate disbandment. Richmond also dispatched 53 soldiers from the 96th Regiment from Auckland to Wellington. These calls for a militia continued to grow with the Wairau affray. The start of the New Zealand Wars. The calls eventually lead to a bill being introduced to the Legislative Council in 1844. Those present noted their disapproval of the bill, unanimously deferring it for 6 months. On the 22nd of March 1845, the Flagstaff War broke out, which proved to be the catalyst for passing the bill. In 1844, a select committee of the House of Commons had recommended that a militia, composed of both settlers and native Maori, and a permanent native force be set up. On the 25th of March 1845, the militia ordinance was passed into law. 26 officers were appointed in Auckland, thereby forming the start of New Zealand's own defence force. Major Richmond was appointed the commander of the Wellington Battalion of the militia. The newspaper article of the time notes that Wellington had a mounted volunteer corps. The Nelson Battalion of Militia was formed the 12th of August 1845. In June 1845, 75 members of the Auckland Militia under Lieutenant Figg became the first unit to support British Imperial troops in the Flagstaff War, serving as pioneers. 7 militia were wounded in action between the 30th of June and the 1st of July 1845. 1. A man named Raleigh later died of his wounds. The Auckland Militia was disbanded in August or early September 1845 because of budgetary constraints. Disbandment of the Nelson and Wellington militias followed, much to the dismay of their supporters. Those at Nelson under Captain Greenwood decided, regardless of pay or not, to continue training. Trouble in the Hutt Valley, near Wellington, in early March 1846 prompted the new governor George Grey to proclaim martial law and call out the Hutt militia, in what became known as the Hutt Valley Campaign. Following on from this, the local paper noted that the No. 1 Company of the Wellington Militia had been called out, while the troops stationed in the town had been in the hut. The paper further noted that Grey intended to maintain 2 companies of militia in Wellington. As problems continued in the area, at least 160 militia remained. These were supplemented by volunteers and Maori warriors from the Te Aropa. On the 28th of October 1846, with the passing of the Armed Constabulary Ordinance in 1846, a fresh call was made by Mr. Donnelly of the legislature to do away with the militia because of its expense. However, the cost to Britain of maintaining a military force in New Zealand was considerable, prompting a dispatch on the 24th of November 1846 from the Right Hon. Earl Grey to advise Lieutenant Governor George Grey that the formation of a well-organized militia and of a force of natives in the service of Her Majesty would appear to be the measures most likely to be successfully adopted. Further pressure in the early 1850s from Britain for removing their forces prompted pleas for them to remain, as the militia were deemed insufficient for the purpose. 1854 brought a new threat to the attention of the colony because up to that time the military focus had been upon internal conflicts between settlers and the Maori. War had broken out between Russia and Turkey. This war began to involve the major European powers and exposed New Zealand and Australia to a possible external threat from the Imperial Russian Navy. Parliament discussed providing guns at ports around the country for use in the event of a war with a foreign power. By 1858, attention had swung back to local issues with a land dispute in New Plymouth, prompting Governor T.